We're back with the General Gary King, and we're going to talk to him about the economy and a few other issues there. Before we went for break, we're talking about the housing bubble and all that, and the jobs that were lost and all that. And you talked about the HPP, the home ownership program there, helping individual foreclosures. Let's move on a little bit because we have a short amount of time there. There's a group on the, I believe New Mexico Partnership is what they're referred to as, and it's a state-funded program. Organization. It's by Steve Virek and John Garcia. They were suggesting that we need to diversify from federal government jobs, okay, which we have relied on 60 years for, into private sector. But then there's an issue with that when you're talking about going into the private sector. These are $60,000 jobs, $60,000 to $100,000 jobs that we're talking about regarding the federal government. How do we diversify? I'm not sure if I quite understand exactly what they mean by diversifying, because then you're looking at call center jobs or you're looking at jobs that are $9 to $10 an hour if you're getting into the private sector, low-skill job. So how do you, what are your thoughts on that as far as the diversification goes?
Sure. Well, it's always good to have a diverse economy. Okay. And I worked for the federal government during the Clinton administration. I was my title was the director of the Office of Worker and Community Transition, and so my job was to try and help communities that were impacted by downsizing Department of Energy facilities to diversify their communities and do things. So I have some experience in those, and so a lot of it's in how you do it. And you're right, if you're just trying to move people from from the kind of jobs that we have at the labs, which are by and large jobs where people have advanced degrees.
These are high-skilled jobs.
Yeah, they're high-skilled jobs. You know, you can't move them into an economy where there aren't other high-skilled jobs. They'll move away. And one of the problems we have in the New Mexico economy right now is that people are moving out of the state of New Mexico, and so we have this brain drain in New Mexico because people aren't finding jobs. So for one, I think that it's important that we continue to work with the federal government and make sure that they understand that New Mexico is still the best place to do that kind of research. I mean, both Sandia, Los Alamos, Kirtland, we have my wife worked for several years for what's called the Air Force Nuclear Weapons Center that's located here in Albuquerque, and so I think that that it takes some planning in order to do that kind of diversification.
But does that make sense to you, though? Because, and I don't mean that they're wrong, but or suggest that they're wrong, but there's a defect in that school of thought, in my opinion. And when you're looking at diversifying in that manner, when they're targeting 60 years of jobs here, and we have relied a lot of it on those federal funding. So we need to protect the federal funding. I'm not sure exactly how they mean by, so I think this is why I wanted to ask you what you thought about it as far as if it made sense to you.
Well, I think that we're not going to create those jobs by in the spiral of, chasing those individual companies or whatever with, with just saying we'll give you lower taxes or we'll write off your property taxes or something like that. I mean, the states, when I was in the legislature, so 20 years ago, went through this race to the bottom where everybody was trying to offer incentives to companies to come, and they found in a lot of cases that the companies would take advantage of the incentives and then move on somewhere else where there were other incentives or whatever. And we need to generate a job base here that that creates good paying jobs. And an example of something that is working is the spaceport, and a lot of people forget that I actually carried the legislation 20 years ago, more than 20 years, well, about 20 years ago.
You were part of it.
That created the spaceport.
When you were in the legislature.
When I carried the bill, and my father signed it, actually, and my wife was Yolanda, who is a scientist and who has worked here in New Mexico for about 30 years now as a scientist, was on the original Spaceport Commercialization Commission. So, those are things that we were doing 20 years ago to create good jobs today. So I don't think that you can go out and put a Band-Aid on the situation and say, we're gonna bring in call centers or we're gonna do this. I think something that has worked well for New Mexico, for instance, has been the kinds of incentives that we've offered to the movie industry. And that creates not only acting jobs and such, but there are a lot of technical jobs, as you know, in producing a television show or something. And so those, by and large, have been good paying jobs. And so we need to continue to work to generate those kinds of jobs. But we do that by, you know, we have classes at our universities now where we're training people to be cinematographers and you know, those kinds of skills. And I think if you can show the companies that have good jobs that you have a skilled workforce, then you can recruit them in, you know, with your skilled workforce. So we need to spend more effort on our educational system and on generating a climate so that we can bring in those high-paying jobs and not just doing the race to the bottom to see what we can do to encourage.
In addition to the high-paying jobs, we have a crisis with the low-skill jobs. At the same time, you saw in the casino that just opened up,
Yes.
400 jobs, 6,400 individuals applied for it. Same with the Target Supercenter. 250 jobs, 7,000 people. So we do have an issue with the lower skill jobs, and I'm not saying that it's all wrong to try not to diversify from there. But you have to think of all these things and before you come out with it. Another thing, when they were talking about there's a lot of companies in other states that are looking to come here because of our this last session we had the tax cut
Yes.
go through. It was a pretty controversial thing. They're saying because of that tax cut, there's a lot of companies that are looking to move to New Mexico due to that. And we have yet to see that. Considering is one thing, I think, and actually signing the deal is another thing. Would you agree with me on that?
Oh, no, I agree with that, and I think that that once again, you know, we have states around us now that have no taxes, and so you know, however much we cut the taxes, I don't know that we can compete just in that way. Also, one of the things that I'm concerned about, that package was pushed through so quickly that there was never any discussion about whether or not giving some tax benefits to companies, whether they should give us something back, like guaranteeing a certain number of jobs. You know, one of the programs that's worked well, and we developed it many years ago, is the job training program, where we give some assistance to companies for hiring somebody and training them. You know, we'll cover half of their salary, and that kind of program worked well because it generated jobs.
Did you agree with the tax cut?
No, I actually did not. I think that, for instance, we gave up, you know, supporting our state employees in order to do that. We, you know, the size of state government has shrunk to the point that we're not providing services to people in things like workforce solutions. You know, it's my understanding that the workforce solutions took a budget cut during this time. So there are people out of work that need help, that need the services that they get from workforce solutions, and they're not available to them because in order to give tax cuts to corporations, we took funds away from those people that needed help there.
We'll take a short break. We'll come back and we'll talk about a couple other things. We'll be back with Attorney General Gary King.